we're talking about boundaries, if you haven't been with us, and we want to encourage you to there's a couple books. One's called Boundaries, one's called Boundary with Kids. It's by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Boundaries with Kids especially is really good for parents, but they have a whole series of books. They found their $1 million idea, and they're just running it into the ground in the best kind of way. So all their books are really good. We highly recommend them. Tonight we're going to make it as practical as we can. I admittedly am not somebody that I can think in big ideas a lot better than I think like practically. So have patience with me. But what's more practical than the Cat in the Hat, right? So I'm going to read Cat in the Hat for you. Have you ever heard of this, the Cat in the Hat? Anybody? As I was thinking about boundaries and how to think through this, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if we had some kind of case studies? And there's a couple things that came up, a couple books that I read to my daughter, my kids, and I'm like, this is about boundaries. This stuff is even in the books that I read when I was a kid. So the books that we're going to read, Cat in the Hat is the first one. Okay, so we all know the story, right? I'm not going to sit here and read it to you, just so you know. You're like, really? I came here for this? You guys going to read me Cat in the Hat? Right, it starts out with me and Sally. We sat there, we had nothing to do, right? I don't even have to read it. I have it memorized because I've read it a million times. And then in walks the Cat in the Hat. He knocks, he just comes in, he just walks in the house. He said, why are you sitting there like that? I know it is not sunny, I know it's wet outside, but we can have lots of good fun, that is funny. And he goes on about this, and he says, don't worry about it, your mother will not mind if we do. Now, as you have been learning about boundaries for a couple weeks now, I want your little spidey senses tingling a little bit, okay? The main character is narrating, says, Sally and I did not know what to say, for our mother was out of the house for the day. Right? Here, what we have in this story, as innocent as it is a lack of boundaries. In walks a stranger and offers fun with no consequences. And you have this conscience in the book that's the fish, right? And the fish says, no, this is not a good idea. Make this cat go away. Your mom's not going to like this, right? And, of course, the fish, being the only one that has the boundary, has no real power in the relationship. So insanity ensues, right? But think about this. This book is really about boundaries. As the cat does one crazy thing after the next, he's balancing on a ball, and then, of course, all the things fall, right? And they bend the new rake, and then the ship is in the cake, and all these other sorts of things, and the fish goes in the pot, and he does not like it. No, he does not. Okay, so through this book, everything gets worse and worse, right? And once you get to the place where they play the game called Fun in the Box, right? They're upset about the first game. The first game doesn't go well. So the cat says, I got another good game you like. It's called Fun in a Box. I will show you two things. I will show them to you now. These things will love to have fun. And the Sally and I did not know what to do. So we had to shake hands with thing one and thing two, right? Recognize this as a lack of boundaries. They don't have any boundaries. They don't have the wherewithal that the fish has to say no, right? And by the end of the book, the house is a total mess, and luckily, the cat also comes in to clean everything up, right? That's where it diverges from reality, not the place where the cat walks in and does all this stuff. What really happens is there's people in your life like the Cat in the Hat that will come into your life and make a whole mess because you don't feel like you have the ability to say no, or the right to say no. And they're doing things in your life. They're messing up your life in ways that you You know it's not right, but because you feel polite, because you feel obligated, you let it happen. Right? As you raise your kids, it's really important that you raise them to be able to say no to things that are not right. One of the things that I learned is really important for boundaries, especially with my daughter, is she can always say no to a hug. She can always say no to a kiss from grandpa, from whoever, okay? It's really important that little girls know that they can say no. It's really important that we all know that we can say no. So one of the really practical things that we can do is respect the no of our kids. That doesn't mean they get to say no to anything and everything. But when there's times when they say no to something that they can say no to, really, really make sure that you respect their no. Okay? The other book is The Giving Tree. This is another one from when I was a kid, right? You guys know this one? Okay. I read this book as a kid and I loved it. And then I bought it and read it for my daughter. And I'm like, this book is horrible. Right? This isn't the giving tree. This is the codependent tree. And as somebody that struggles with codependence, I know codependence. This is the codependent tree. So we're going to read the codependent tree, right? So there was once a tree that loves a little boy. And every day the boy would come and then play, and he would gather the leaves and make crowns and play king of the forest, and he would climb the tree and swing from the branches and sleep under the tree and eat the apples and all these other things, right? And the tree was happy and the boy was happy, and it was all great and dandy until the boy gets older and he doesn't come around anymore, right? So the tree has this relationship with this boy. The tree loves the boy so much, and everything that the tree cares about is involved with this little boy. And then when the boy stops coming around, what happens? Come on, you said you know the story. The tree gets sad, right? I'm not digging for like some really deep philosophical answer. The tree gets sad. Okay, so the tree is sad that the boy's not coming around anymore, right? So how is this related to boundaries? Think about it. The tree's purpose, the tree's sense of self is found completely in this relationship. Right? That's what codependence is like an addiction, except you're addicted to a person instead of a substance. Everything that the tree is tied to the boy's happiness. So as long as the boy's happy, the tree's happy. As you see, then the boy doesn't come around for a while, and he becomes a young man, and he comes back, and the tree shakes with excitement because the boy comes back and says, "Come on, climb my trunk and swing from my branches and eat apples and have a great time and play king of the forest." And he's like, "I'm a young man. I don't like playing king of the forest. I want some money. Can you give me money?" And the tree says, "I have apples. You can take the apples and sell them and get some money." And so the tree gives, right? And so the boy takes all the apples and the tree is happy. And then doesn't come around. And then the man comes back when he wants a house. And the tree gives branches for the boy's house. And I'm not a builder, but I know enough about woodworking that you can't build a good house out of tree branches from one tree, okay? So I don't know what this guy's house looks like, but I'm glad I don't live there. But the tree is happy. Branchless, and then the old man comes, and you see what happens every time the boy comes back, as a young man, as a middle-aged man, as an old man. He comes back and he's not happy. He's not happy at all. He comes back and he's just grumbling. And now he says, "I just want to get out of this place. I just don't want to be here anymore." And the tree says, "Well, you can cut down my trunk and make a boat so you can sail away from here and get out of this situation, and then you'll be happy." And the tree lets the boy cut down the trunk, and the tree was happy, but not really, because it's not a tree anymore. How is this related to boundaries? You can give and you can give and you can give, and then you cease to be yourself. You cease to be what God has created you to be because you give not out of a place of abundance, not out of a place of purpose, but a place where the only way that you're okay is if the other person's okay. Okay? This is all about boundaries. This is about unhealthy relationships. And the end of the book, the tree is sad because the tree has nothing left to give, and the old man is sad and doesn't even want anything, just a place to sit until he dies, right? It's really kind of not so awesome. And but the thing of it is that in all the giving, the boy always came back and wasn't happy either. When we give everything to our kids, when we go out of our way to make sure they have everything they need, we think that we're creating every opportunity for them. We think that we are doing them the biggest favor in the world, but all we're teaching them is that we'll always give, and we become like this fountain of everlasting whatever, money and apples and branches for houses and trunks for boats. But in reality, what it teaches our kids is they can't find happiness within themselves. They can only find happiness from taking. And the boy never really takes responsibility for his life because he always looks to the tree for his happiness. And the tree is never really happy either because the boy's never really happy. And she lives, I'm assuming it's a she. Is it she? I don't know. It's a tree. Come on. So the tree is always only happy when the boy's happy, and the boy's never really happy, so it's a problem. Okay? So I want you to think about boundaries as this lens through which you see the world. Right? And things will come, like you're seeing double vision, and it'll come into focus, and you'll see these sorts of things everywhere. You'll see it in the way that you relate to your boss. You see it in the way that you relate to the checker. Like when somebody asks you something that you want to say no to, and you feel guilty, pay attention to that. It's a boundary thing. When somebody says that they're unhappy, and you're looking for branches or trunks or apples to give them so that they can be happy, even though it diminishes your own sense of self, pay attention. These are all boundary things, right? Being able to say no is important for your kids, and being able to say no is important for you. And your no is really important to your kids too, right? There's two different ways that we mess it up. And in the first way, you see the kids not being able to say no to this outside influence, the cat in the hat. And so those kids have no sense of self, so they have no boundary till they let anything in. Right? And then with the second one, it's this parental figure, which is a tree, which is weird enough as it is. But this parental figure doesn't have any boundaries. So the boy only takes, right? And so, I don't know, in thinking through this, I was looking at Dr. Seuss, and I'm like, that's a weird-looking guy. I don't know if he's the guy we should be looking to for guidance for our kids anyway, Elton John called, he wants his glasses back. It's kind of a weird guy. But then you look at Shel Silverstein, I noticed because this is the picture he puts on the back of the book. Man, that guy, it's like Mr. T's angry uncle over there. He's pitying fools and writing kids' books. He looks like the villain from like an old Western. And so I don't know if these are the people we should have guide us with our boundaries. But one of the things that I thought was really helpful in practically thinking through what my boundaries could be is praying through the serenity prayer. And I hope you know the serenity prayer. And if you don't, it's right here. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay? I want you to think about the things you can't change about your kids. I want you to think about the things you can change about your kids. And pray for peace. Because there's things you can't change. And there's things you can't change immediately. There's things that can change over time, but really, it has to come at their choice, not yours. What are the things you need serenity to accept? Apply it to Dr. Seuss. What are the things that these two little kids could change, right? They could have locked the door, not let the cat in. They could have said no from the first place. They could have said, yeah, you can come in, but don't bring that box with the crazy things. And no, you can't stand on this ball and balance the rake and the cake and the fish in the dish and all these other things. This is not the kind of game we like to play. Let's play checkers. But they didn't say no, right? The kids had no. They didn't change the things they could change. The tree didn't accept the things that it couldn't change. Happiness for the boy was something the tree took on itself. But it had no control over the boy's happiness. It gave everything it could, and the boy was still never happy. And then what it ended up doing is losing itself. So when we think about the things we cannot change, you have to accept that. You can't make your kids happy. One of the things that parents want most for their kids is happiness. And as long as they're happy, we're okay. And this has become a guiding principle for us. And I think that's one of the big problems. It's not within your responsibility to make your kids happy. Stop living to make your kids happy. What we end up doing is we end up cheating them out of growth because we're so worried that they won't be happy. When you think about growth, I want you to think about pain. I want you to think about failure. What are the ways that you've cheated your kids out of growth pains? What are the ways you've cheated your kids out of failure? Because failure is a part of life, but it's also integral to growth. It's integral to really going beyond the things that you thought were possible. It's about learning, right? And if you don't fail, you don't learn. Not in meaningful ways. You don't learn to adapt. You don't learn to think through problems because you haven't experienced any problems. So think about the ways that you can stop rescuing your kids from their pain. I want you to think of one way. And it doesn't matter what age your kids are. And now I'm not talking about the pain of wounds because they're not safe or the ways that they have broken relationships or different, pain of not having their needs met. Like, sorry, kid, I'm not feeding you anymore because I'm trying to teach you how to be adaptive. It's not that. I'm not telling you that, okay? What I am telling you is we need to stop rescuing. We were at a park, and Lydia, my daughter, who's 4, I think she was 3 at the time, she climbed up and wanted to go down a slide, and was kind of tall. And there was a lot of kids at the park. And so she was kind of scared. And the kids were old. Most of the kids there were older than her, and they were kind of running past her. And she was sitting at the top of the slide, scared to go down. And the kids, there's a line building up behind her, and they start pushing around her, which makes her more scared because they're getting a little, all up in her space. And my wife's like, aren't you going to do something? And one of the few things I feel like I did right, who knows, maybe she's scarred for life and she's going to have therapy because of this. But I was like, no, she's not unsafe. What's happening, I'm in control to the point where I know that she's safe, so I'm not going to intervene. We need to let kids have their own conflict. One of the ways that one of the things that surprised me that I learned recently is that parents spend more time with their kids now than any time, even back to the 60s. There's more time with parents like this with their kids than at any time since the 60s. And I think a big reason is the kids don't go outside and play. They don't play alone with other kids where you're on the sandlot ballpark and you're trying to umpire your own games. You're inventing games. You're figuring out how to navigate certain problems. And you don't really figure out how to do that. You don't referee yourself in any aspect of childhood these days because there's always a parent there to tell you to play fair. There's always an adult there to make sure that the rules are followed and to guide you. So kids don't learn how to figure out that fairness thing. And then when they get to be an adult, that's why you have all these cries of, it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair that I have student loans, it's not fair these other things, We need to figure that out. We need to help our kids figure out fairness for themselves so that when they get to the unfair world, they can. It's the wisdom to know the difference between things that we can change and can't change. The long version is good. There's a longer version of this prayer if you haven't heard of it. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships is a pathway to peace, right? Not saving your kids from pain, but taking as Jesus did, the sinful world as it is and not as I would have it, right? Taking your kids as they are, not your sinful kids as they are, not as you would have them, and trusting that God will make all things right if we surrender to his will. And that we'll be really reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him and forever in the next life. Amen. Let that be your prayer. Pray the serenity prayer in your parenting and think through the practical aspects of it. Like, what am I trying to change in my kid that I can't change? What am I taking responsibility for that I should give my kid responsibility for? I read an article, I think it was an NPR thing I saw online. They're talking about kids in the Mayan culture. Like in Mexico, the indigenous Mayan people, the way they raise their kids is just different. And one of the things they do differently is that from the age of 1, the kids have chores. And it's just something that families do together. And the person writing the article noticed, like, this 12-year-old is doing the dishes without even being asked. And then they, after they get done with the dishes, they start vacuuming. And like, what's the magic? What's the secret? I'm like, I got to bottle whatever this is and start selling it in the U.S. because this is amazing. And the key is that they have kids from the age of 1 doing chores. They just grow up never not doing chores. They always do chores, and it's just a part of their life. And the author said, what I do is I spend all this quality time playing with my kids, and then when my kids go to bed, I rush around trying to do all the chores so that when the kids wake up, then we can just have more quality time playing. What they do in the opposite is that instead of spending all that time playing, you spend a lot of time taking care of tasks. And kids always have tasks, even from a young age. And that's one of the things I think we could do is and it's related to boundaries, because you're teaching those kids that being responsible for the things that they play with, being responsible for the dishes they eat off of, being responsible for the floor they walk on is part of life. And so they're teaching those kids responsibility. And I think we could do that. What are the ways that you can create better boundaries for your kids?
All right. To piggyback on what Ben was just talking about, one of the things that we do in our house is when it's time to start making dinner or put the pizza in the oven, whatever the case may be, I gather everybody who's home together and start doling out tasks, right? Now's when you help fold the towels. Now's when you put your laundry away. Now is when you vacuum the pet bed. Now, all these different things. Now, if we're chopping up something to prepare for dinner, come on, kid, here's a knife. Don't hurt yourself, chop up this onion, right? I don't have time to teach my kids how to chop onions and, fold all the laundry and, you know what I mean? So let's get together and do all these things together. We spend a half hour, there's 6 of us for crying out loud. So if we all focus our energy, we can get a heck of a lot done in 30 minutes if we put our minds to it, right? So just to piggyback on that, this is what we do. Everybody knows that we're going to do that, and after a reasonable amount of time, everybody just expects it. So, yeah. Definitely. So we asked you guys to fill out some cards last week, and so we're going to talk about a couple of those, and we'll just kind of see what happens here. This first card, I love everything about it. The handwriting makes me think that a man wrote it, which is wonderful. And it says, what is the most important, underline, boundary to set? Boil it down for me, lady. Quit wasting my time. What is the most important boundary? And let's just get to it, right? Which made me laugh. And you can't really tell that I've got that strike. What is the first and greatest commandment? No, boundary is what I said with that. Because, sorry, this answer is really trite. I feel a little bad, but not all that bad about it. The first and greatest boundary is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Sorry, but you asked, okay? So the truth of the matter really is, not trying to be a smart aleck or anything, that relationship has to be right. The relationship that we have with our Heavenly Father, who created us and who loves us and who knows us and who guides us and sustains us, all of that has to be first. So if you have to set one boundary, make it be the boundary that this relationship doesn't get messed with, period, end of story. If the greatest boundary that you have is something that has to do with your family, that's all fine and great, except for that your family's going to go wonky and sideways. And if you've put your identity in how your family is doing, be prepared to crash and burn. If you're putting the most amount of energy that you have into your work, that's not actually going to answer anything either. And so if you have your boundaries around work, whereby at work you always say yes, then at home you can't say yes to everything, so you're going to find yourself saying no a lot. And then you're not going to have anything left with your family either. The questions that we have after this really kind of follow up. I'm really glad that this question was asked, because it really does set up all the rest of them that we have as well. Get this relationship right with how you spend your time with God. And listen, maybe that's a matter of just putting the YouVersion Bible app on your phone and getting a verse a day. Maybe that's where you start. Instead of checking your email first thing or social media first thing, you open your YouVersion Bible app and you get a verse first thing. Maybe that's where you start. Maybe it's in podcasts. Maybe, I'm not asking you to open up your Bible and read a chapter a day to go to 0 from reading the Bible in a year. That'd be awesome, but it's not probably practical. So start with that, whatever makes sense to make that relationship the most important thing that you do. I love when we look at the Bible and we look at the way Jesus set boundaries, you will not find a situation where Jesus begged anybody. You will not find it. Jesus spent time with the Heavenly Father. He got what he needed from the Father. And then he told people the truth. He didn't necessarily tell them what they wanted to hear. Jesus told people what they needed to hear. And he set it out for them, and he would say, this is the answer to your question. And then they would get to decide. Like the rich young ruler, right, came to Jesus and said, what do I need to do? And Jesus said, what you need to do is you need to sell everything you own. And that wasn't prescriptive for every human being for all time, but it was descriptive for that particular man in that place, because his first boundary was not to love God. His first boundary was to love money. And Jesus knew that was going to be really hard for him, and Jesus didn't beg him. Jesus watched him walk away and let that happen, knowing that this wasn't the man's last chance, that there would be other chances, that seeds had been planted, but Jesus didn't take it personally that man walked away. And I can't tell you how helpful that is for me personally to remember that, especially as your children get older. And they're going to ask you for advice, and then you're going to tell them what you think, and they are going to promptly act as though you never said anything. And they're going to do whatever they want to anyway. And in that time, then when things go wrong, because remember, kids want two things. Kids want things to go well, and kids want to do things their way. So then when things go sideways, as sooner or later they inevitably will, then you get to fight back the urge to say, I told you so. Or you can say, remember last time? Just remember last time when you make your next decision. But when there are ways that we can let our kids make their own decisions and we don't have to beg them because we're willing to let them decide and we're willing to let them have the consequence, then it goes better for everybody. And that's what Jesus modeled for us. In the same way, as a pastor, if Ben and I found our worth on whether or not you guys took anything from this class and applied it, I mean, listen, if you email us and one of us and say, hey, I wanted to talk with you more about that because there's this and this going on and I don't really know how to do this, we would set up an appointment and it would probably be one of the best appointments of our entire week. But we're not going to call you at home and say, I'm going to pick on you, Teresa. Sorry, Teresa, I noticed you spacing out during class a little bit. What's going on? It's an invitation. So when we get our relationship right with Jesus, all of a sudden, strangely, we're going to have a lot better. First of all, we're going to have more to give. Our cup is going to be more full than it is before. We just will, because that's how God works. One of us times one God does not equal one. Like, God multiplies that. And so we get way more of ourselves. We become way more human when we're counting on God to tell us who we are. I can't remember where. Well, let's see. So we get more of what we need to be able to share with others when we need to share it. And then we also have the ability to realize if what we're doing is out of generosity and love, or if it's out of obligation. And we get better at understanding if our kids just need, if what they're asking for is a genuine need, or if what they're asking for is a genuine want. And we have an opportunity to teach them in that. So the first and greatest thing is to get our relationship right with Jesus. So then there were a couple of questions about helping our kiddos understand physical boundaries, hitting, pushing, standing too close, which if you guys probably grew up watching or, spent your teenage years or adult years watching Seinfeld, you automatically think of the close talker. And nobody wants their kid to be the close talker, right? And then, so that was the first one, physical boundaries, and the other one is emotional boundaries. Okay, so first of all, so we're going to spend one more week on boundaries next week, the 24th, and then after that, we have a parenting, we're going to bring in Allie Halley is her name, and she teaches a parenting class here at Hope on behaviors, and we've decided instead of holding a whole separate class for that, we're going to have her come in during this time and teach her behaviors class. And so this first one that starts October 31st, and it's 4 weeks, so however that plays out with Thanksgiving, I can't remember. I think we have one, it goes through November, and then, anyway, it's 4 weeks. But she's going to talk about behaviors specifically with kids up to age 11. And so if physical boundary stuff is something that you're dealing with, I encourage you just highly to come to the 4 weeks after this and hear Allie Halley talk about that. She's amazing, and she's going to give you concrete things to do, and then you're going to take them home and try them, and then you're going to get to come back and ask questions about what worked and what didn't work, and it's going to be awesome, so I really want to encourage you to do that, particularly if these physical behaviors are something that your kiddos are dealing with. There are some things that are not negotiable, and hitting and pushing and kicking and biting of those things just aren't negotiable. So with my approach to that would be you just simply remove the child from the situation, depending on how old they are, and we don't hit. And 1 minute of quiet time or time out for their age up to about 5 or 6, then you got to figure out something else. Okay? But you just immediately remove them from that, and you have to have your boundary. You have to know who you are. You have to know that no matter how much they fight it, it's not going to hurt them to figure out how to sit quietly for 1 minute. It might be the most important thing they learn at this point in their life. And so I would, like I said, just remove them from the situation, and eventually they are going to figure that out. They have to learn that there are other ways to deal with their emotions. They can't just go hitting somebody. The most important thing in all of that is that you stay calm. If you go to their emotional level, forget it. It's all over. You don't need to be mad at them for hitting or biting. It just is what they did. They're not going to grow up doing that. They're not going to still be 22 years old and biting people, hopefully, if you deal with it now, okay? They might, yeah, right? And then as far as like the physical space issue, kids don't really get that. And what's interesting to me is that this physical space and what is appropriate physical space, this is different all over the world. It's different even in different areas of the United States. If you go to a big city, you will realize quickly that physical space is not as important to people who live in a big city when there's people around all the time as it is to us in the Midwest. And sometimes I think that if you put on like the biggest coat and like the biggest winter coat imaginable to a Midwesterner, and then if you put the other person in the biggest winter coat imaginable, the personal space is like 6 inches between you and the biggest winter coat. I don't know. That's just kind of what I think about when we are walking around all bundled up, you know? But when they get all up in your face and you're trying to teach them physical space, just say, hey, sweetheart, just you're in mommy's space a little bit, and just physically move them. That's okay. If they're talking to their friends and they're just right all up in their space, just physically move them. They have to learn it. These things are learned. They're not necessarily understood. So when they're little, don't worry about teaching them those things. They need to learn it. If they don't naturally sense it, then you just kind of help them with that. The emotional boundaries, this is really interesting to me because these are as blatant as the physical ones, but we don't necessarily think of it that way. So a couple of questions that we had centered a lot around school and how do I deal with my kiddo who really dislikes this subject, really dislikes this teacher. They complain about it all the time. How do I encourage them? Different things like that. So different things going on at school or different ways that kids get stuck in a particular place and want to rehash it over and over and over and over and over. School is the perfect opportunity for your children to learn that they cannot change it. They cannot change what's happening, to go back to the serenity prayer. They get to choose their attitude because there isn't anything that anybody can do about it. It is what it is. And we all know this. We all know that there isn't anything that we can do about it. So the question is, how do we not get sucked up into the drama of it? So the kid comes home and they're, so-and-so again, and I can't believe this happened, and I hate this class, and why I'm never even going to use geometry, and why do I have to take Spanish, and blah, 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 all these different types of things, right? What I really want you to think about doing is just stay calm. Yeah, you know what? I can understand why that's frustrating. I'm sorry. I'm never gonna. Yeah, that would upset me too. How do you think you can approach that? Let them figure it out. They are looking for you to get just as involved emotionally in this situation as they are. And this is the exact same thing as walking up to a kid and clocking them in the head to get their toy. They're walking up to you with their problems and attempting to clock you in the head with their problems to see if you're going to react to it. And when you respond to them in empathy, saying, yeah, I understand why that would be frustrating. I would be frustrated too. Then they know that you heard them, but you're not trying to fix it. You're not swooping in to rescue them. You're not doing anything. Imagine your kid comes up to you and they've opened the milk and they're pouring their cereal and they're like, oh, smell this gallon of milk, this stinks. So you take it and you smell it and sure enough it stinks and now you're holding it, so now it's your problem. They're trying to get you to get as involved into their drama at school as they are. They want to have you kind of go through all this with them and get down in the muck with them. They're just learning. They're just learning about emotional boundaries. When you swoop in and say, you know what, you are right. You are never going to use geometry. This is stupid, and I don't know why that teacher actually expects you to do your homework. What is wrong with this teacher? Well, you've taught them that they can't do hard things. You've taught them that somehow their opinion matters more than the Board of Education and their teacher. Which, newsflash, it doesn't. They're just called to go to school and do the work. They're going to get through it. So have empathy with them, demonstrate what empathy looks like for them, realize that they are just learning how to handle their own emotional boundaries. If you agree with them and encourage them, then you basically just teach them how to be perpetually frustrated. And when they're 8 years old and they're telling you about how much they dislike their teacher and why they have to take a certain subject, fast forward to when they're 28 and they have their first fight with their spouse and they're coming back to you to tell you about how they can't believe their spouse handed them a stinky carton of milk and made them throw it away. Okay, so those things, when you teach them how to just sit in it and teach them that they have the ability to deal with it, then they learn how to do that. One last thing that probably doesn't have to do with boundaries also, but if your kids are coming home and complaining about school all the time and how miserable it is, I would just ask you to consider how you talk about how you spend your day. And if all you do is complain about your job, they're just learning that that's how to have conversation. So keep those things in mind, right? Okay, this was a really good question about medication and ADHD, and I have to be honest that Ben and I don't have a lot of experience with this, but the question was, the mornings before the medication kicks in are terrible. They're terrible. And first of all, I feel for whoever that is, that would be very difficult. So hang in there, you're doing a great job. What I would suggest for you to do is to check with the kiddo's doctor, make sure that dosing and everything is the way it's supposed to be. I would also encourage you to come to the class that Allie Halley is going to help us with, because she does have experience in that, and she would be able to speak to that a little bit more than Ben or I can. In the meantime, it seems to me that depending on the age of the kiddo, they probably don't like feeling out of control either. And so if it were me, I would start with talking with them when the meds are working and when they're in their prime, and come up with a plan for the morning. So if that means the night before you are working together, or the child on their own, depending on their age, is getting everything set up for the morning, because at night they're able to do that, they're able to focus long enough to do that. However you can coach them and guide them into taking responsibility and keeping their own side of the street clean when they're able to do it will help set you up for success, I would think, in the morning when things are a little bit crazy. But if that doesn't work, then ask your doctor, ask people who have more experience with that, your counselor or whoever, to help figure out how to handle those times when the medicine hasn't kicked in yet. And then there were a couple of questions about really, really, really challenging stuff that are happening to us, to parents as adults, or happened when we were children. That the thing is, our stuff spills out and affects our kids. Marriage and parenting will bring up the junk from our own childhood and will bring up our own wounds and our own hurts faster and more completely than anything else will. There is no way around it. And so if there's stuff from your childhood that you are seeing creeping back up, that you're seeing how it's causing negative behaviors, you're doing things you wish you weren't doing, maybe there's a relationship, your relationship with their other parent is so broken and fractured right now that this is your problem, but it also is your child's problem that they have to process. So first and foremost, we want to help you with that. If you want a conversation, we want to talk to you about that. Absolutely, we want to do that, and we want to help you work on the stuff that you need to work on. Sometimes it'll just take a conversation. Sometimes if you need therapy, you need to get it. We have an awesome page of counselors who are Christian counselors that we recommend people to. There are a couple of secular counselors that I know really well. There's one that has helped our family immensely. And so don't be afraid to get that help that you need so that you can see these things that are causing trouble for your family, call them baloney like they are, and then be able to move forward in that. When I talk with women, because normally women are who I talk with, adult women who are having challenges with their adult children, I can't tell you how many people I talk to that are struggling with their adult kids. Maybe they don't even get to talk to their adult children anymore, who they tried out of the best of intentions to shield their kids from hurt and sadness and disappointment, because maybe the other parent struggled with alcohol or addiction, or maybe they struggled, their parent struggled with alcohol and addiction, or maybe someone passed away too soon. So they're trying to make up for pain, for disappointment, for frustration, and it comes from a place of wanting their kids to have the absolute best. Then their children never learn empathy. Their children never learn how to be disappointed, and 9 times out of 10, the person they blame for that is the one who did nothing their whole life but try and fix it. So it's a real life giving tree type situation. The only way Shel Silverstein got that wrong was the kiddo in the stories that I hear is they actually grow up to hate that tree. In this totally bizarre twist of the way that things go. The one who tried to shield them and make them happy, they end up with burning resentment for that person. So it really, really, really matters. We think that the worst thing we can do for our kids is be emotionally unavailable. The saying yes and trying to shield them from everything is really just a different way of being unavailable, but on the outside it looks like we're trying to make them happy, which is that thing that we really, really don't want to make them happy. I really want to make them sad, so they learn how to be happy in some weird way. So anyway, so these are the questions, and thanks for asking them. And if you have any more, you can always email us, or we're going to do more question-type stuff next week, too. So, all right.
The first and greatest boundary is to love God with all your heart, with your soul, and your mind. The second is like it. Love your neighbors yourself, right? Jesus says. The really important part with this in relating to boundaries is we need to love our neighbor as God commands, but we also need to love ourselves. Having good boundaries is how we learn to love ourselves, how you learn to care for yourself, how you learn to say, I'm okay with me. I get to be me, and whether or not people are okay with that is their problem, not my problem. And when I live to make sure that other people are okay with me, then I have a problem, and it's a boundary problem. So this is a really helpful diagram, I find, that just visually lays out what boundaries look like. Healthy boundaries look somewhat porous, but they're firm, right? We can have limited or non-existent boundaries. It looks like that. We can have boundaries that are too loose, or too rigid. You can think about what your boundaries look like. What does it look like to have limited or no boundaries? What does it look like to have boundaries that are too loose? Can you think of an example of what that might look like for a parent? What would that look like for a parent?
Your kids walk all over you.
Yeah. Have you ever been the parent or seen the parent? Maybe not us. We wouldn't be this parent. But we've all seen that parent in the store. The kid's laying on the floor in the checkout aisle. I want a candy bar. I want a candy. All right, here's a candy bar. Just shut up. Right? You give in. This is it. I'm going to give you whatever you want just so that I don't have to be embarrassed with your behavior right now. And the kid's like, yes, I win. If the kid doesn't have any consequences or is saved from all consequences, doesn't really have to bear the brunt of the things that they do. A really good example of this from somebody that I know and love, who will remain anonymously because this is public and it's going on the internet, so I hope they don't watch this. There's somebody in my family who, in high school, drank and got drunk, and his mom said, well, he wasn't drunk. He had too many hot dogs. Like, the reason why he was sick is because he had too many hot dogs. Right? And it's about saving face, about being embarrassed about the kid's behavior. So everybody else in the family, everybody on the periphery, everybody that was experienced this kid getting drunk to the point of sickness, insert your own mental image there, they were told, this is all about having too many hot dogs. What are the ways you excuse away your kid's behavior? You make excuses. Well, yeah, they acted like a jerk at the soccer game, but you see that referee? If that kid wasn't doing their thing, then, my kid wouldn't act like such a jerk. Well, they're just really tired right now, and they haven't, what are the ways you excuse away the poor boundaries and you save them from the responsibility of their decisions? Think about that. We all do that to some extent, and that's an example of being too loose with our boundaries. What's maybe an example of too rigid of boundaries for parents? Yeah, you expect perfection. You get a B? We don't get B's in this household. What's your major malfunction, private? You act like the drill sergeant, right? That's kind of the two ways. You have the drill sergeant parents, right? Or the can't we all just get along parents? I'm not making a political statement, just so you know, okay? But wouldn't we all feel better if we could all just get along? Now, we can kind of lean to one direction or the other. I want you to think about which direction you lean toward. Are you the can't we all just get along parent that's going to let things fly that shouldn't fly? Are you going to make excuses for the way that your kids behave? Are you going to be too rigid with your boundaries? Are you going to demand things for them that are unreasonable? Are you going to be mad every single time they say no, or make them do things for you that they don't really need to do? Are you expecting them to be responsible for their feelings in a way that's not age appropriate? Are you expecting them to bear the burden of the emotional baggage of whatever's going on in your family, even though you're not dealing with that way yourself? What are the ways that your boundaries are too rigid or too loose? Okay? All these things relate, okay? So when kids get bad grades, they don't really care. They've been saved from having to worry about the consequences of their actions. When kids are out of control, they really have a lack, and they don't respect each other's personal boundaries when they're at physical space or other boundaries. When they are at Hope Kids Wednesday right now, and they're doing the actions to the songs, and they're punching their neighbor. And I have to hear about that every single time because my wife runs Hope Kids Wednesdays. So I really hope that you can have firmer boundaries with your kids, so I don't have to hear about your kid punching some other kid at Hope Kids Wednesdays. No, I'm just kidding. My wife doesn't go home and complain about your kids too much. So, then they need to learn to respect other people's boundaries. When your kid doesn't listen, it's that lack of fear of consequence. If you expect things but you don't really follow through, then there is no consequence, and they're not going to be afraid. When they're defiant, it's this lack. They just lack the boundaries. They don't understand that they need to be responsible for the things that they are responsible for. Okay. There's different ways that we respond that creates more fear in our kids. The point is not to create fear in your kids, right? That's the drill sergeant way, right? The drill sergeant is too much fear in your kids. The can't we all get along way is no fear. They need to be appropriately afraid, right? They need to be respectful, right? In the Bible, there are different translations that talk about fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, things like that. Like, why? What do you mean fear? Fear is respect. Respect doesn't mean that I'm afraid that somebody's going to come down with a hammer on my head at any point, or if I'm a sinner and I walk into church, I'm going to get struck by lightning. But it's the sense that this is important. I'm on sacred ground here, okay? The way that you do this is you create a space where they can talk. You talk about your feelings. You talk about what's going on in your life. The way that you talk about your day, as Amanda said, sets up the tone for how they talk about their day. If you don't share anything important with your kids, then they're not going to share anything important with you. Now, if you share important things, now you don't do it in a way that's like, well, Daddy lost a job today, and your mom might divorce me, so I got that going on. How was your day? And now your kid's peeing his pants because they're so scared of what's going on in their life. I'm not saying share your stuff with your kid in a way that disrupts their security. I'm saying, I had a good day today. I had a hard day. I had a good day, but then this happened. You share things in your life with your kids, they will share things in their life with you. When they talk to you about important things, how do you respond? Do you respond in a way that's always about disciplining, or do you respond, and do you listen just for the sake of listening? As you create this transparency. And then what you're doing is setting a foundation to where you can actually have conversations about boundaries. You can actually establish boundaries because you set the tone of the conversation. You set the tone of the relationship. So in your transparency, you're creating a space where they don't have to be afraid. If every time they come to you with a problem or come to you with anything, you always come with discipline, maybe you're the drill sergeant. If you come to them, if they come to you and there's never any sort of consequences, no matter what happens, maybe can't we all get along? So when you think about the fear, what we can do is create a space where the first thing we say is, thank you for sharing. Thank you for respecting and trusting me enough to share what's going on in your life. Let's talk about this. And then from there, you talk about, okay, what do we need to do to fix it? What do we need to do to make the things that are wrong right? Teaching your kids how to say no and respecting their no is really key. Okay? So there is one more thing that I want to do. As we learn how to set boundaries, okay? So it really does come down to this. If you respect and love God first, and this is what we have up in our house, our family rules are this, right? Love God, love yourself, and love others, and then laugh a lot, right? That's, except for the last one, they're really about boundaries. But we're going to help you figure out how to have a plan, right? First, you need to evaluate. And this, I'm taking this straight out of Boundaries with Kids, okay? So you don't want to get it secondhand if you go buy this book, okay? And then you'll have it in writing. But first, what age are your kids? Think about boundaries in an age-appropriate way. And then think about their maturity level. Are they kind of advanced as a 3-year-old, or my 3-year-old's reading, 6 and up books. I'm sure they are. I'm sure your kid's way smarter than all the other kids. Good for you. What is the context of the relationship? What's the nature of the relationships your kid? Is your kid going through a hard time because of moving? Right? You just recently moved and they had to change schools. What's the context of, are you going through a divorce? Have you been through a divorce? How are these things affecting the way that your kid is able to handle boundaries? Is there tension because grandma is like everybody loves Raymond and always here and then causes all sorts of problems? And then in your assessment, figure out what really is the conflict. Think about what's the one boundary that you're struggling with that really needs to be changed. And think about it specifically. Think of specific problems that need to be fixed, right? Part of the reasons why we don't really do important things is we're like, oh, my life's a mess. Well, I hope it's better tomorrow. And then it never is, because that's all the conclusions we come to. But if you think the serenity prayer, right, I want you to use that. God grant me the serenity to accept things I can't change. I can't change the fact my life is a mess. But God grant me the courage to change the things I can. There are specific things that I can do. I can get up earlier and, not be late to work. Or I can have a conversation with my kid before bed so that the morning goes better, as you talked about, before the meds kick in. That's a really great idea. Talking to your kids about boundaries when things are good is really important, right? So you think about all these things with your kids' boundaries, and then think, what do I need to own in this? What are my issues that I'm bringing to this relationship? As my kid flails around on the floor in Target, what is that doing in my emotional space? How am I responding, not in a rational way, but out of an emotional space, and I'm not really coping with that well. And maybe the last 10 times that's happened, I've responded in a way that I gave in, or, I felt guilty, or I felt shame. I'm the guy that teaches the parenting class on Wednesday night. I hope I can't have you doing that. Knock that off. You're making me look bad. No, nobody else says that except for me. Amanda does. Yeah, there's all this extra pressure. I teach a parenting class. You can't act like that. The way that I don't do that, but if I did, think of how much baggage that would dump on top of my kid, right? They don't need that. We need to own, okay, what are your own insecurities and what are you bringing to that, okay? Then look at your own life context. What are the struggles that you're going through? Is your spouse in a different place with boundaries? If you're not on the same page, if you're the one that's trying really hard to set boundaries and your spouse is like, well, I don't want to, be the jerk, or, yeah, you told me to read that book, but I don't have any time to read books. It's going to make it hard. So just recognize that. But the more you can get on the same page and the more that you can figure it out together before you start applying things it's really important, okay? And then the next part is to deal with the plan. Name the problem, name your expectations, and name your consequences. You bring that plan to your kids. And you do it in a time when, not when the meds are wearing off and, Dr. Jekyll's turning into Mr. Hyde, not when the kid is tired or stressed out, not when you're tired or stressed out, not when the kid's watching TV, not, all these other times that are inconvenient. You find the time that's perfect when everybody's in a good mood, everything's going well, and you sit down and you have a conversation like, you're not in trouble, but this is something that's going on that just needs to be different, okay? And then here's the way that we're going to deal with it. Here's the new expectations. If you talk to them, I bet they're not happy with how things are going either. And then when you figure out, okay, here's what's going to happen, here's our expectations, and here's the consequences that we're going to apply, then you can figure out, okay, how do we go forward in a better way? You want to take the perspective of, I'm not against you in this, we're together in this. So we're together going the same direction toward this, fixing this problem. And as you do that, there's going to be some things where they want to negotiate. That's a really important part of boundaries. Boundaries mean there's some, because it's not the super rigid stuff, right? The healthy boundary has pores where things can go in and out. There are some things that might be negotiable. There are some things that are not negotiable. So negotiate on the negotiable things. Don't negotiate on the non-negotiable things. And one key for negotiation is you figure out what that is before you go into the conversation. Okay? And you figure out what it is that I need to talk about, that you're ready to talk about. Okay? And then once you're clear about things, it's really that foundation of really talking through your feelings and expectations. And, one of the problems that we have with boundaries sometimes is, that thing where mom's on a rampage and mom's mad, and I have no idea why, right? There's a couple moms over here that are like that. So when you think about it, people, yeah, it's not moms. Dads do that too. Okay, so I'm not being gender biased here, but when you realize, okay, what does that do to the psyche of your kids? You're in a bad mood. They assume that it's their fault. Kids always assume it's their fault, and that creates anxiety. They're trying to fix it. They don't know what to fix. That's a boundaries thing. When you're clear and open about how you feel and why, what's going on, let them know that, okay, mom or dad had a bad day at work, whatever, the garbage disposal doesn't work now, and whatever the thing is that's not going right in your life, then you're like, okay, it's not me this time. And then they can move on with their life. Part of the problem is when we're not clear about our expectations, and then we blindside them with a consequence when they didn't realize they were doing anything wrong. Now they're like walking on pins and needles around the house, like, okay, what do I got to do to make sure that I'm okay? All right, so be clear with your expectations, be clear with the consequences, and stick to what you say. The worst thing you can do is set a boundary and then not stick to the consequences, because then you lose all credibility. Okay? And Ali is going to talk a lot about that stuff. But what you need to do is stick with it over time. And it takes time. They're going to think you're bluffing at first. Okay? But once, okay, a couple months later, all right, the last 30 times this happened, mom followed through, so I guess this is the way it's going to be. And so kids will learn. Even your kids. Even my kids. Right? So let's go back to the serenity prayer. Let's pray the serenity prayer as we close. Oh, there's the creepy authors again. Okay. Let's pray this together, okay? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking, as he did, the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. So, we'll talk more about it next week. So, does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
So I just have an example of something that's kind of going on in our household. So we have an 8-year-old in 3rd grade and a 5-year-old daughter. Our son is obviously in 3rd grade. And then our daughter is in kindergarten. So one thing that I'm struggling with my husband is he doesn't have a problem disciplining our son.
Yeah.
But now when it comes to our daughter, he will not discipline her. And every time I point it out to him, like, why are you not disciplining Pearl, but you discipline Easton?
Yeah.
Just the other night, he's like, well, she's too sensitive. I don't want to hurt her feelings, And
Yeah.
she's like his little girl, but it really bothers me because I feel like I'm the one constantly disciplining
Sure.
both of them, and he just will not discipline her.
So, that's your husband's stuff.
Yep.
Okay? So, girls are not more sensitive than boys. Girls are just as tough. And we treat them in a way that teaches them they're not as tough. Right? We need to teach them they're just as tough, because they are. They're just as capable, and boys are just as capable of being sensitive. And we need to teach boys that they can be sensitive too. And so when we think about the way that we teach, we put them in those kind of bins where, okay, you're a boy, you're not as sensitive, and you're a girl, you are sensitive, and then we treat them differently. Then they have a different sense of boundaries. So by not disciplining her, then she's learning that she can just come take the branches and the trunk and the apples in a way, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what's happening. So when you think about the way that your husband is not disciplining your daughter as well. The conversation needs to happen with your husband, and you need to figure out how to deal with what's going on here about the way that he thinks about gender. And that's a conversation only you can have with your husband. Get him this book and sit down with it. Let's figure out other ways to have that conversation.
And not in the heat of the moment.
Not
in the heat of the moment. Right. Right. Because what this is how he's expressing his love for her. He just doesn't realize that the way that he's doing it is a way that down the road actually doesn't help. And so, and not in the heat of the moment, and not in a way to make him think that he's wrong, but you just lay out, all you can do is lay out your concerns. Honey, I'm concerned that by not disciplining her, you're teaching her to think that she can always have what she wants, and we don't want to send her out into the world that way, because that's not how the world is. And so if we can decide on what the rules are going to be, and then what the consequences are going to be, and we decide when we're not in the heat of the moment, then it's easier for everybody, because he doesn't have to think about it like, she did this is the consequence. Yeah.
Other questions?
That's the same in our house too. I don't know if you were here a couple weeks ago and I commented.
Yeah.
Was it last week? I said it's
I
a
think it was
lot
last
easier
week.
for me to boundary and have high expectations of my daughters, and less so on my son. And the exact opposite is true of my husband. So it's not uncommon. You're not alone. And when I said that out loud, a lot of people nodded. So
Yeah, I saw him. You know.
Yeah.
In my house, I feel like I'm harder on my daughter because she's older than my son who's
Sure.
younger. So it's just different for different, and that, again, that's my problem. That's your problem. That's his problem. That's all of our own problem. We have to manage our own stuff and take responsibility for our stuff so that we can do our best for our kids, right?
And the payoff in all of this is when they start to do their own thing and start making their own decisions and start to make good decisions, and you feel like, they're going out, all the hard work that you've done, then you realize, this is why I did it. And there were days that it was really, really hard, but this is why. I've got one turning 16 tomorrow, and I'm totally okay with it because she's good. Not because she's natural, but we've worked on it.
Yeah. She's going to be okay.
She's going to be okay.
And you're all
I'm not
okay.
sure about the car.
Yeah. I'm not sure all about all you people.
Yeah,
And I'm not
good
sure
luck.
about
Wear
any
your seatbelt,
pedestrians.
okay? And but whatever she does, I can handle it because it's not a reflection. She's making her own decisions, and I'm cool with that. And she can handle it too because she's learned how to do hard things. Life's tough, but so are your kids.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay. See you next week.
Yeah, bye guys.